Welcome to Reclaiming Lost Learning and Winning the Battle of the Forgetting Curve. I'd like to thank you for spending some time with me today, and I hope you enjoy this presentation. Have you ever thought back to a prior course and realized that you remember very little? You're not alone, and our students likely feel the same way. But why is it so easy to forget hard-earned knowledge? And is there anything we can do about it? And how can we help our students? This presentation is intended to help us reclaim our lost learning and also to introduce ways that we can help our students do the same. Throughout this presentation, we'll work through some basic information about how long-term learning works. We'll research tools and techniques that support long-term learning and retention. And we'll find some easy to learn and easy to apply strategies that we can pass on to students. Before beginning, please take a moment to set an intention. Please pick one that will guide your actions and behaviors for the next 10 minutes. Write it down either on a piece of paper or a clean digital document, like Word or Google Docs. Some examples on this slide for your consideration. These are strategies that we can share with students, but we're not going to spend time on them right now. Okay, so the brain and brain structure. The brain is one of the largest organs in the human body. It's also one of the most complex. Each connection that the brain makes is referred to as a synapse. The brain is comprised of many specialized areas, all of which work together. This diagram highlights 4 critical areas of the brain that are crucial for learning and memory: the prefrontal cortex, the hippocampus, the amygdala, and the cerebellum. The brain is also divided into several lobes. There are 4 lobes of the brain that play a critical role in learning and memory. You'll see the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe, the occipital lobe, and the temporal lobe. Learning and memory share a lot in common. They also have important differences. Learning is a process that can modify subsequent behaviors. Memory, on the other hand, is the ability to remember past experiences. Basically, it refers to what we mean by how we store and retrieve all information that we learn. Memory and learning depend on one another. There are different types of memory, including sensory, short-term, working, and long-term memory. When reading for class, content is held in short-term memory and only short-term memory. The act of reading alone is not structured for long-term learning. Something else must happen in order to build a long-term memory. Working memory is similar to short-term memory in that both do not hold on to attention for very long. Long-term memory, in contrast, holds information for a long period of time. It's subject to less decay or loss of information than short-term memories. Short-term memory's conversion to long-term memory requires the passage of time. The process of experiences and information becoming recorded in our long-term memory, is referred to as memory consolidation. This graphic illustrates how memories are transferred from sensory memory to working and short-term memory to long-term memory. The forgetting curve helps us better understand just how quickly our brains forget newly learned content. In the late 19th century, a German researcher tested his memory over various periods of time, and he discovered the nature of memory loss over time. What he discovered is that basically we lose most of the content we learn in the first couple of days after our initial learning. This graph shows how information is lost over time when a learner makes no attempt to retain that information. Basically, unless we actively do something to retain information, we can take a course, read an article, watch a video, etc., and remember none of it after several days. For brain and memory, associations are critical. The more associations we form around information, the stronger our memory of that information becomes. Now take a moment to compare and contrast the two graphs. The one on the left is the original forgetting curve. The one on the right is an updated forgetting curve. What the one on the right illustrates is the magic of review and ongoing practice and review. Each time you review a piece of information, retention jumps back up to 100%. Forgetting then sets back in the same way as if we learned the item only once. But what changes, and quite dramatically, is how quickly we forget. So the forgetting curve becomes significantly flatter and significantly less steep with each review interaction, as long as we review at the optimal time. This is called the spacing effect. Okay, so now that we recognize how quickly newly learned information is lost, we're also realizing that the magic of review can make a tremendous impact and difference in the strength of our memories. What we're going to do now is explore some evidence-based strategies that will help us do just that, basically battle back against the forgetting curve and remember more of what we learned. The three strategies that we're going to cover very briefly today are active recall and retrieval practice, spaced repetition and the spacing effect, and interleaving. They are not only powerful, they are also very easy to apply. Active recall focuses on getting information out of our brains and memory. It requires a learner to actively stimulate memory during the learning process. It's the opposite of passive review, where learning material is processed passively, for example, by reading or watching only. In order to retain any information in our brain, we must refresh that information on a periodic basis. The more we recall a memory, the stronger it becomes. What this is referred to as repetition, and spaced repetition in particular. Spaced repetition is a learning technique that is based on what we know about the impact of review and how it influences memory. The third strategy is interleaving, and what this refers to is mixing up practice materials as we review and study. So the more we practice active recall using information we are trying to learn and memorize, the more of that information we'll be able to remember and be able to retrieve in the future. Okay, so as we continue, let's take a moment and review. Active recall and retrieval practice is a learning strategy where learners focus on getting information out of their brains. Doing so requires that learners actively stimulate memory during the learning process. This strategy becomes even more powerful when combined with additional research-based strategies such as spaced repetition and interleaving. We've also learned that in order to retain any information in our brain, we must refresh it periodically. The more we recall a memory, the stronger it becomes. Finally, we studied interleaving, which refers to mixing up our practice, and it's alternating practice of different items or problems at any given time. So how can we apply these strategies on a daily basis? Unfortunately, our textbooks do not generally encourage active recall, retrieval practice, spaced repetition, and/or interleaving. Textbooks tend to combine related material with no obvious way to review previously covered material. We need to take our learning into our own hands. This slide shares a bunch of strategies that you can apply on a daily basis, and you'll have access to all of this information at the end of the presentation. Here are some additional strategies that you can apply. And I like to quickly cover flashcards as well. Practicing active retrieval with personal flashcards is a great option. Online cards are also very helpful. What happens though is we often run into issues with optimal spacing and deciding when to test ourselves. And what I like to mention is that there are free digital tools that have been created to address this very challenge. So you're able to upload notes to online tools that schedule practice for us. In order to make the most of these tools, it's up to the learner to build and review time each day. And just for some examples of some of these tools, I'd like to introduce a tool that I use called RemNote. If you often take notes online or find yourself reading online, you might find this tool very helpful. It converts online notes or inputted notes to spaced repetition flashcards for effective long-term learning. You can use the tool to take notes on what you're learning and you want to remember. The tool has a bullet point editor that encourages the breakdown of complex topics into smaller component parts. You can then organize what you're learning into folders if you'd like. The tool automatically converts your notes into spaced repetition flashcards so that you can practice active recall. And the tool also mixes up your cards so that you can do so in a manner that practices interleaving as well. Here are some other options. These are actually not free, and RemNote is free. I forgot to mention that. But you can definitely explore all of them and see what works best for you. And I want to thank you for your time, and I hope that you have picked up a few strategies that will lead to happier and stronger long-term learning. And I want to wish you an excellent rest of the conference. All of the resources and references will be available to you at the end of the conference. Thank you.